Hi, welcome to the pre-assessment briefing. This pre-assessment briefing is to explain to you a bit more about the assessment process so that when you are going to be assessed, you are fully prepared in order to have a nice and easy process for it. Okay, so when we're doing an assessment, a pre-assessment briefing is important so that you as the learner know exactly what the assessor is going to be doing. Unfortunately, not all assessors take the time to make sure that their learners are prepared properly. So I've made this short little video just to help you whenever you're being assessed. Okay, so first thing I'd like us to talk about is what exactly is an assessment? Well, in the learning environment, when we're talking about an assessment, we're talking about a process of collecting information about an individual's performance and comparing it against certain criteria for recognition or developmental purposes. In other words, the assessor is going to be looking at you, the learner, and evaluating your performance against a set of different criteria. And then they're going to tell you whether you're competent at it or what you need to do to improve to reach competency. Okay, so why do we do assessments? Well, in the South African NQF system, we do assessments to be able to award you an NQF-linked qualification. That is to say, a qualification that is credit-bearing. That unfortunately means we've got to do specific things in very specific ways, otherwise we won't be able to get you those credits. So what I'm now going to be explaining is everything that we've got to do in that process to make sure that you know what we need to do as well as what you need to do. Okay, so the first thing I'd like us to talk about is when we're talking about an NQF qualification, what that is and what it means. Okay, so in South Africa, we've got the National Learner Records Database System. That's a system where all educational achievements that are credit bearing end up against your ID number. So for example, if somebody goes onto the NRLD and they look me up, they'll find my ETD qualifications that I've done, as well as my degree that I did at the university, as well as my high school record. So in other words, it's essentially a complete record of my educational performances. Okay, so that's the important thing to know about this National Learner Records database. Now, another thing to know about a qualification, well, in South Africa, is that we've got the NQF system. And in this system, qualifications can be measured against each other in terms of levels and credits. Now, the levels indicate the complexity and the credits indicate the duration. So the lower the level, the easier something is. The higher the level, the more difficult it is. The fewer credits it is, the shorter the program is. The longer the program is, the more credits it'll have. To give you an idea, if you open up Google and you type in SAQA 50334, then you'll get, if you follow the links, you'll get to the National Learner Records Database entry for the National Certificate Occupationally Directed Education Training and Development Practices. Now, this is then a certificate on level 5 and it's 120 credits. You'll also see that there is a certificate on level 4 as well as a certificate on level 6, a diploma on level 5 and a degree at level 7. Okay, so what's then the big differentiator between these different qualifications? Okay, so the certificate is then 120 credits, the diploma is 240 credits, and the degree is 360 credits. So, and you know, usually a degree would take 3 years to do, a diploma would take 2 years to do, and a certificate would take 1 year to do. So that kind of then tells us that 120 credits is roughly equal to a year's worth of learning. Okay, and then what then do the levels mean? Okay, so let's take the high and the low and then the middle. Okay, so in South Africa, the lowest level is NQF level 1. The highest level is NQF level 10. So on NQF level 10, that's where you get your doctorate degrees. On level 1, that's the earliest when a person is allowed to leave the formal schooling process. What we then have in the middle is we then have level 5, which that particular certificate isn't, and that's then part of the further education and training. A level below that, we've got the National Senior Certificate, which is commonly known as the Matric Certificate. That is 120 credits at NQF level 4. Okay. Then there are also the 3 different quality councils who've got control over the different degrees in different places. But for that, you'll just have to watch the video about the quality council. So in other words, just to sum up, levels and credits is how we can compare qualifications against each other. And then usually qualifications are broken down into smaller portions. And in order to achieve the full qualification, you're going to have to do all of the smaller assessments to get you there. Okay, so then the next thing I want to talk about is assessment as a process. So your assessor is going to be taking you through 4 different things. The first section is the planning and the preparation. That's where they get ready to do the assessment, and also they prepare you to be ready for the assessment. So they need to do a pre-assessment briefing with you and explain all of the things that I'm explaining to you now, as well as 1 or 2 other more specific things relating to the assessment that you're going to do. Okay, so then usually the documents that will be filled in during this process is a pre-assessment briefing and then an assessment plan. And the assessment plan will contain all of the details about the when, the where, and the how, all of those assessments are going to take place. Then as part of this process, your assessor has to explain to you the RPL process and also find out if you've got any special needs or barriers that are going to influence the assessment. Now, RPL stands for Recognition of Prior Learning. What that means is if you have been doing things similar to what you're being assessed on, you should discuss it with your assessor to find out if any of that evidence can be useful for the assessment. Now, very often the RPL process then happens when people are doing certificates, especially when the government brings out a new regulation that all people in a certain industry have to have a certain qualification. Then people in that field, they don't want to stop for an entire year from working to go and study again. Because they then have previous experience, they take that evidence to an assessor, and then the assessor performs recognition of prior learning. They have to comply with all of the same other rules, and then that person can gain credits for things that they've learned through work or life experience. Take a moment and think about things that you might have RPL evidence for. Quite a lot, isn't it? So there's then a process in which evidence from the work or previous experience can then be brought in. So you need to discuss that with your assessor. Now, special needs are factors that are inherent to yourself that maybe influences your ability to do the assessment. These can range from temporary things like a passing illness, or longer term things like disabilities or other associated things. For example, if you are colorblind, certain assessments are going to be somewhat more tricky for you to do, and the assessor would need to know about that. But what's very important is that not all special needs are relevant to all different situations. So when you have a special need that you think might influence the assessment, please bring it to the attention of your assessor. Okay. Barriers then are more simple. They are environmental problems like noise, light, temperatures, various things like that. So you just have to keep an eye on those as well and mention to your assessor if there are any problems with regards to that. Okay. Now, after the planning and the preparation process is complete, the assessor is going to move into the conducting portion of the assessment. Now, when the assessor is conducting the assessment, they'll be using what we call the methods of assessments. That means they're going to be questioning you to test your knowledge, and then they're also going to be doing observations to see you carry out the tasks. Then the third method of assessment is product evaluation. That's when they evaluate things that you are busy doing. Let's take, for example, a chef. Now, there are certain things that a chef needs to know about food preparation. That will then, they will usually cover that in an exam or in a workbook. But a lot of what the chef does as a vocation, you have to actually see. So then there's going to be assessments to see things like knife techniques, health and safety, and related matters. But of course, as they say, the proof is in the pudding. So at some point you're going to have to eat the food that the chef has made as well. So questioning is when they're testing their knowledge, observation is when they're looking at them working, and product evaluation is when the final product is inspected or sampled. So those are then the 3 methods of assessment. Now, while the assessor is using these methods of assessment, you as the learner will be doing assessment activities. So you do the activity, the learner uses the method. Okay. Now, other very important things is that the evidence that the assessor collects through this process has to comply with some of the principles of assessment. Now, the principles of assessment are what the assessor needs to do to make sure that their entire process has been done appropriately. So when they're busy collecting the evidence, they've got to keep 4 principles in mind. First, the evidence that they collect about you needs to be collected in a valid fashion. That is to say that the evidence that they collect from you has to be generated in a realistic process. Then the second principle that they've got to keep in mind is that the assessment has to be authentic. That means all of the evidence that you are bringing in, it must be your own work. You can't get someone else to do the work for you and then you claim the certificate. It must all be your own work. Then the next principle is the evidence that you submit must be current. It must reflect your ability to perform at the present time. Tomorrow? No. 100 years ago? No. In the here and now, everything that you give evidence to must be things that you can still do. And then the last principle of relating to the evidence is the principle of sufficiency. This means that the assessor must collect evidence against all of the criteria in the unit standard or in the qualification. They can't just assess you on half, they must assess you against everything. So they must collect evidence against all of these different points. So then to recap, the 4 principles relating to the evidence are valid, authentic, current, and sufficient. Now, there's 4 principles that relate to the method of assessment. That's now the observation, questioning, and product evaluation. These 4 principles are that the assessment must be fair. That is to say, the assessor can't introduce any barriers that aren't required by the qualification or the unit standard. So they've got to stick with what's there. Then the next principle is that of appropriate. That means the assessor must evaluate you using a method that's suited for collecting proper evidence. That is to say, if I'm assessing you on your knowledge, I've got to ask you questions. If I'm assessing you on your practical ability, I've got to observe you, or I've got to look at products that you've created. Then, the next principle is integrated. That means the assessor must not just have the assessment as a separate process, they must think about how it can be integrated into either the work or the learning process as well. This then, of course, ties into with the idea behind RPL. Then the last principle that relates to the methods of assessment is that the methods that are chosen must be effective and efficient and repeatable. Because the assessor isn't just doing one assessment, they are doing many assessments over time. Okay. Then there's also some other principles. These are the principles relating to the overall process. So any assessment that gets carried out must be carried out in a consistent and a reliable fashion. That means when an assessor is assessing 10 or even 100 or even 1,000 people, they've got to assess the people the same way and expect the same evidence and give the same findings on the same evidence. Likewise, the evidence that you submit to one assessor should be of enough quality that another assessor would come to the same finding based on that evidence. The second principle relating to the overall process is the process has to be open. That means you as the learner need to have the opportunity to give inputs regarding special needs, possible sources of evidence and RPL, as well as you need to understand exactly everything that's going to take place. And that is then, of course, why the pre-assessment briefing is very important for you as the learner. Okay. So those are then the 11 principles of assessment. The assessment, the evidence has to be valid, authentic, current, and sufficient. The methods need to be fair, appropriate, integrated, and manageable. And the overall process must be consistent, open, and systematic. I forgot to talk about systematic. That means the whole assessment needs to be carried out according to the policies and the procedures of the organization for which it used in its accreditation process. Okay, so now the assessor has planned and prepared. They've conducted the assessment. Now, the third stage in the process is very, very important. This is the feedback part. Now, during the feedback part, your assessor has to tell you as the learner exactly what you did right, as well as the things that you did wrong, as well as how you can improve it and how you've got to use those skills forward. A very common method of giving feedback is then the hamburger model of feedback. First, they're going to start off by talking about some of the strong points in your performance. Then they're going to talk about some of the weak points in your performance. Then they're going to talk about how you should fix those weak points. And then they're going to talk about some of the strong points again. So the bottom bun is where they start talking about the strength. The meat is why we're giving the feedback. It's on the weaknesses. The garnishing, the tomato, the onions, whatever else you're going to put on the burger, is the flavoring, and that is how you'd be able to fix the weak points that you had. And then afterwards, you can't eat a hamburger sticking your finger into the garnish, so you need to close it off with some strong points at the end. So that's then the hamburger model of feedback that the assessor has to give you. Now, a very important thing for you as a learner to know is that there's very often a reassessment if you're not yet competent, and that needed to have been explained to you during the company's pre-assessment briefing that they gave you. My company's reassessment policy is that you get free reassessments before you get charged again. Okay. Now, if you cannot accept your finding of competent or not yet competent that the assessor has given you during the feedback, you will have the opportunity to appeal. Now, what's important to know about the appeal is that you can't just appeal because you're unhappy about the finding. You've got to feel and have some proof that the assessor hasn't adhered to the principles of assessment or that they acted in another otherwise biased or unfair manner. Now, the way in which you would deal with an appeal is that you would first bring it to the attention of your assessor, either during the feedback session or afterwards. Then you and the assessor are going to have a discussion to see if you can resolve the situation. If you cannot resolve the situation, in this process there is the moderator. Now, the moderator is the person whose job it is to evaluate the performance of the assessor. So, in other words, they're essentially the assessor's boss. Now, you might be thinking, but it's not really fair. They kind of work together. They're going to gang up against me. And that's true, and it does happen, which is why there's still a third step in the process as well. Now, all training providers and learning organizations have accreditation with an outside body. These award bodies, or ETQAs, Education Training Quality Assurance Bodies, have then an oversight role over the training provider. And the individuals carrying out these roles are then usually known as verifiers. So if you as the learner can't come right with the assessor and you can't come right with the moderator, you can contact the ETQA to bring your concerns to their light, and then they will do an investigation and give you feedback. Okay, so that then is the feedback process. And then there's one final step that's still going to take place. The assessor is going to conduct a review. Now, the review isn't going to be about just your assessment. It's going to be about all of the assessments that took place at the same time as yours. The assessor then is going to think about how they can improve their own performance, how they can improve the documents and the activities that were used, and they're going to then put that in a report and give it to the moderator. The moderator is then going to go through the work that the assessor has done to confirm that they followed all of the necessary processes and that they adhere to the principles of assessment. Then once that's done, the moderator is going to contact the awards body. The awards body is going to send a verifier, and the verifier is then going to come and look and inspect the work of the moderator and the assessor. And then after this process is finished, the awards body is going to endorse the results, give the results to the training provider, and then the training provider is going to give the results to you. Okay, so I hope this short little video has explained a bit about the assessment process. But remember, your own assessor is going to have to give you the exact details of the when, what, where, and how you're going to be assessed. Have a good day.